You know, today, when CEOs are realizing, yep, they overextended themselves during the bubble and now find themselves embattled or simply out of a job, there are just a few out there who can really say they knew how to lead. At the World Business Forum going on in New York City today, Fox Business is a sponsor, I had a chance to speak to one of those superior leaders, Bill George, about things like leadership and bringing a country through very difficult times. He ran Medtronic for a decade and wrote the book, 7 Lessons for Leading in Crisis. So we talked about what we've done over this past year, but I began by asking him whether medical device makers like Medtronic should embrace or fear universal health care.
The president's agenda is not even the president's, Congress's agenda. It's looking at a very narrow slice of health care, which is insurance access. We're not looking at the elephant on the table, which is lifestyle, which leads to 70% of health care costs. So we're not examining the cost issue, the underlying root cause. I'd like to see every American get coverage. But to do that, we've got to address the cost side of the equation. Otherwise, we'll bankrupt Medicare and maybe the country with it. So my concern is that everyone's embracing it now without really getting to the root cause of the problem.
And we're not at that root cause, but we seem to feel like we're at this 11th hour moment because the Senate Finance Committee is putting together all kinds of things. And your former industry, the medical products and device makers, obviously are trying very hard to at least be part of the shaping of the legislation. And that's understandable because as it looks to shape up, if things were to go the way they are going, the device makers could be hit with fees that added up could be billions, tens of billions of dollars over just the first 10 years. Looking at that, how would those kinds of fees impact the growth of the industry?
Well, this is, of all the ideas I've heard in healthcare in the last year, this is the worst. This is a tax on innovation. So we're going to punish innovation. It's innovation we need to solve the problems. It's like Medtronic defibrillators that allowed people to live at home instead of being in and out of emergency rooms all the time and in and out of the hospital with heart failure. That now, millions of people have these products, and it totally changed their life, and it reduced costs dramatically. We need to encourage innovation in healthcare, but that's a long-term proposition. They're playing a short-term game. When Congress gets into these kind of last-minute, how do we do it, they often make very bad decisions, and I'm very concerned that that's what's happening.
Shutting down innovation because of such an onerous tax or fee, as it were. But you've got Senator Al Franken, the Minnesota Democrat, on your side in that regard. He has spoken out against those kinds of fees. Yet, don't you believe, as you said, if we want universal health care coverage, that every sector has to make concessions?
Well, yes. I think it's a question, you contribute what you do well. It's giving access to people. Maybe a company in the medical technology should ensure that everyone gets access to its products. And you have differential pricing and things like that to do. That's what the drug companies have done very progressively and said, so it's not concessions. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. You pay for this by saving costs. It's not just getting industries to make concessions. This is like cut your deal with the White House. This is back to the old game of lobbying, and I really can't buy into this. I think leaders of companies need to say, how can we change the game?
Back in February, just as President Obama was taking office, you wrote a Business Week article that many call prescient, and in it you said, quote, "We should support President Obama's proposal to make health care available to all Americans through the combination of private and public insurance pools." It's not really shaping up in that way, but do you applaud his effort, or if you had his ear, would you completely guide him in a different direction?
Well, I like the idea, and I've been a big advocate of this in writing, of the idea of having self-funded co-ops. Might be non-profit co-ops. The government sets the rules. I think I think we ought to have portability. I think if you take your health care with you so you can change employment, so you don't stay in the same place, no pre-existing condition. But that's the rules the government said, and I would have them provide catastrophic insurance. I don't think we can afford to have full health care for everybody without having to pay for it. And I think there's got to be an economic component in everyone's health care.
We're at the 1-year mark of the financial crisis, and you've been very vocal about speaking out about the misbehavior of the financial services industry, which is interesting because you sit on Goldman Sachs' board. Making a lot of friends on the board these days. You have said that businesses contributed to the crisis by advocating that institutions like hedge funds and financial instruments like credit default swaps went largely unregulated. You've also said the financial people are very aggressive. They need referees. Do you think that more regulation is needed? You know it's coming. And should that include the government overseeing executive compensation, or at least looking at it?
Well, let me come to that in just a second. I think what I call advocate is regulation light. It's like the game of soccer. You have a very simple set of rules you can write down, but then everyone plays by the same set of rules. You don't have people in the banking system have mortgages in one sector, and then people outside of that kind of operating outside the rules. That leads to a lot of dysfunctional bank rules, like we saw with Countrywide Financial. Now, as far as compensation, I do sit on the compensation committee at Goldman Sachs and of ExxonMobil, and I was on Novartis. I feel very strongly it's pay for performance. This is the job of the board of directors, not Congress. And Congress does this, again, it's going to be dysfunctional. It'll create a lot of bad behaviors, and the consultants running around kind of in new plans. So I think it's got to be long-term, pay for long-term performance with, I much prefer stock over cash.
Business people are facing decisions every day. What should they all learn from the financial crisis?
That not to listen to Wall Street too much, particularly the pressures for short term. The root cause of this problem are leaders who practice short-termism. And business leaders who did that destroyed great companies, like General Motors, like the former AT&T, like Sears Roebuck. They were destroyed because leaders played the short-term game. In business today, your job is to build for the long term. Often the decisions you make come upon your successor. My best success in Medtronic came from the decisions my predecessor made. So you make those decisions, you build the institution for the long term.
And by the way, when Bill George ran Medtronic, he started off with $1 billion company. He grew it to $60 billion.